this is a special presentation of WENY News at 6 this evening. This is Remembering 9/11. I'm Renata Steele. Tonight, over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be bringing you stories from around the Twin Tiers, as well as here in New York City from the site of Ground Zero.
We also have live reports from our team of reporters at the Pentagon and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, as we honor the 2009/11 victims of the terror attacks on American soil 20 years ago tomorrow. Now, we begin tonight with recognizing Southern Tier natives who died in the Twin Towers, two of them. Paul Hughes, originally from Elmira, he graduated from Southside High School in 1980. Paul lived in Connecticut and worked as a computer analyst for an insurance company in the North Tower, where he was on 9/11. And Ed B.A., originally from Bath, he worked on the 27th floor of the North Tower. Now, after a car accident at the age of 21, it left him in a wheelchair. Ed could not evacuate the building because of that. He patiently waited for firefighters to arrive, along with his friend, Abe Zelmanowitz, who refused to evacuate without Ed. Both men died in the collapse.
And Ed and Paul were just two of the people who died that day, two of 2,977 who were killed in the terror attacks on 9/11. And as rescue and recovery efforts got underway, families clung to any news they could, needing to know if their loved ones survived or if they didn't, if their bodies had been found. In September 2001, WENY News spoke to Ed B.A.'s family as they awaited word for what happened.
42-year-old Ed B.A. worked at the World Trade Center on the 27th floor. At around 9:45 Tuesday morning, right before his building collapsed, Ed called his mother Janet at her home in Bath.
Ed said, "Mom, I'm all right." I just said, "Thank God," thinking he was out. So then I said, "Where are you?" He said, "The 21st floor." So I said, "Well, what floor is your office on?" 27th. Then he said, "I'm all right, Mom." And the phone was gone.
Janet now believes Ed never made it out alive, and that this was his way of saying goodbye.
But I think he was telling me if he had to go, he was ready.
In the midst of all the sorrow and pain comes a story of courage and the gift of friendship. Ed is a quadriplegic. His friend of 15 years, Abe Zelmanowitz, unable to pull him to safety, stayed by his side until the bitter end, giving up his chance of getting out alive.
I was quite touched, and it's a wonderful act of friendship and being a hero in my eyes.
The story has not only touched Ed's sister, but many others as well. In a speech earlier today, President Bush said, quote, "We have been reminded and the world has seen that our fellow Americans are kind, resourceful, and brave. Inside the World Trade Center, one man who could have saved himself stayed until the end at the side of his quadriplegic friend."
They're in a place where they're no longer has to fight the battle of his wheelchair, and Abe will be there, and they can have good times.
Janet and Pam are still hoping maybe by some miraculous intervention that will call. But if not, they're praying time will do its healing.
You think a lot, you cry a lot. None of it helps, but in time, perhaps. There's nothing you can do.
In Bath, Ihad, News Channel 36.
In the immediate wake of the 9/11 attacks, one challenge became increasingly difficult: identifying those who died. One local dentist was called to action to help in this process. Dr. Bob Lyon sat down with WENY's Isabel Garcia to reflect on his services 20 years later.
A lifelong resident of Elmira, Dr. Bob Lyon first got involved in the recovery efforts of the 9/11 attacks by volunteering for personal reasons.
The first call came when I actually called the chief medical examiner's office, where I had received training in the past, and said, if there's anything I can do, I lost my best friend in that disaster, and I'd be happy to come down there and stay and help.
A late phone call the next day led to Dr. Lyon settling affairs at his dentist office in Elmira and packing his bags for New York City. For more than 6 weeks, he would use his unique skills as a forensic analyst to help identify those who died in the World Trade Tower collapse. While he fulfilled IDing many, not everyone who died that day 20 years ago were recovered.
Well, one was my best friend, Paul Hughes. That's the main reason I went down there. Since preschool, he was my best friend. And the first phone call I made when I heard of this disaster was to his mother. And she was crying on the phone and says, "Bobby, I can't get Paul. I don't know where he is. But they say he did go into work today." And I never found any evidence of him at all.
Dr. Lyon tells me there were a range of challenges in the overall process.
In some cases, there would be a coat and a piece of someone's jaw. There would be a foot attached to part of an ankle, and a neck and part of a chest cavity, and teeth that might have been pushed down into the chest cavity were our key to helping to try to figure out who that individual was.
In reflecting on his emotions then and now, Dr. Lyon holds mixed feelings of accomplishment and sorrow.
It was very uplifting. At the same time, it was gruesome and extremely difficult. I was one of the few people that was actually able to do something good, to lay these people to rest, to put a name on that body bag and release it to the funeral director, let the family have the closure that they all deserved.
20 years later, about 40% of victims in the World Trade Center collapse have not yet formally been identified. With this special report, I'm Isabel Garcia for WENY News.
And when news of 9/11 broke, the world was in utter shock. News outlets were running nonstop coverage. It was a story unlike any other. Jayla Scolio anchored for WENY News, and he traveled to Ground Zero just days after the attack. He also went back a year later. I spoke to Jay about his experience working as a journalist on that tragic day.
When I came in about 10 a.m. on September 11th, I came into I saw staff members, reporters crying, and I can still see walking in the newsroom and what I saw. Our news line was ringing off the hook. People were asking what was going on, and I remember picking up one phone call with a woman in tears saying, "Is this the end of the world?"
Jayla Scolio worked at WENY News for more than a decade, and he served as the main anchor before leaving the industry in 2005 to become a pastor and a counselor. Jay vividly recalls the sense of fear and uncertainty as the situation unfolded and how viewers were looking for direction and any source of comfort, something as simple as a voice on the other line.
The people that watch you have put a lot of trust in you. And they don't always know where to go, but you're a friendly and safe place. And if they don't have a tie-in with a church or a pastor or a counselor, they called the newsroom that day.
1 week after the attacks, Jay brought the story closer to home. He wanted to show the Twin Tiers the recovery efforts. At that point, 3 area natives were still unaccounted for in the attack.
Guys, you gotta keep moving up, please. It was once the signature of America's greatest city. Now crews are working around the clock to clear the rubble that was once the World Trade Center.
Down in the city, Jay spoke firsthand to those trying to help.
The usual hustle and bustle of the city had disappeared. It was quiet and somber. It almost seemed that for the first time the city that never sleeps was sleeping. Ron Stensler was one of many who spent time in Washington Square Park offering prayer and comfort.
I feel a sense of sadness, and I feel a sense of urgency that I want to do something. I want to help in some way.
20 years later, Jay says despite 9/11 being such a tragic day, the nation grew closer.
American flag was flying everywhere. You know, people were wearing flag lapel pins kind of everywhere they went. But that event really united this nation. I saw people care for people like I hadn't seen in a long time and really rallying together. And for me, it started that morning when we were caring for people that were calling into the newsroom.
The site of where Ground Zero was has now been transformed into a place of remembering and healing. The Freedom Tower now stands where the Twin Towers once stood, one of the tallest buildings in the entire world. And on the ground, the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, a place dedicated to honoring the nearly 3,000 victims of the 9/11 terror attacks, making sure those who lost their lives that day are never forgotten. I was able to pay a visit to the site just a few days ago. Let's take a look. As visitors enter the museum, they head underground to the original bedrock level of the Twin Towers. The remnants of the foundations of the original North and South Tower are still visible. Bases of steel columns and concrete footings now sitting directly below the memorial pools above. Artifacts recovered from Ground Zero are on full display, from a destroyed fire truck to a fragment of communications equipment from the top of the North Tower that helped with the critical flow of information as the attacks unfolded.
Within the museum itself, there are three main zones. There's what we call the interstitial spaces, the kind of outside flowing exhibitions that circle around where the North and South Towers used to stand. And that gives you a really full overview of the events of 9/11.
Linking the North and South Tower sites is an art installation, a focal point of more than 2,900 blue squares, one for each of the 1993 and 2001 attack victims at the World Trade Center, reflecting the blue sky the morning of September 11th, 2001. The space beneath each tower also hosts exhibitions, laying out the events leading up to and including the day as it unfolded, as well as a post-9/11 world. And a memorial exhibition includes a gallery of portraits commemorating the 2,977 victims of the attacks. Outside of the museum here at One World Trade Center are the North and South reflecting pools. They stand where the North and South Towers once stood, and they bear the names of every single victim on 9/11, not just the ones here in Lower Manhattan, but the victims in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon as well. It also pays tribute to the memories of those who were killed in the 1993 bombing here at the World Trade Center. And just a short distance away, there's also a memorial glade honoring the victims who have passed away from 9/11 related illnesses since. Visitors can look up the names of the victims engraved in bronze surrounding the memorial pools. Water flows 30 feet into each basin before disappearing in the center, meant to be a solemn but tranquil reminder that a void remains that can never be filled.
There's so many stories of resilience and hope and healing that it's as much a site of tragedy as it is a site of enormous healing. I mean, look, everything that surrounds us was an empty pit of ground, once the debris was cleared away, and it's bustling and rebuilt and sort of renewed. And tomorrow morning, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum will celebrate the return of its annual observance of the annual terror attacks. That involves the reading of the names of every single victim by family members, those who are left behind. And that is a private event, and it is happening tomorrow. They tell me they are excited after they were unable to host that in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to the reading of the names, there will be several moments of silence observed. One for each moment a plane struck the North and South Tower, again when they fell, as well as moments corresponding with the attacks on the Pentagon and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
All right, thank you, Renata. Now, outside of the urban settings in New York and the Pentagon, 9/11 also touched a rural area of Pennsylvania. It was the setting of the story of Flight 93. After the break, we have a reporter live in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and we also hear from a family member that was on Flight 93. You're watching WENY News at 11. remembering 9/11. We'll be right back. As we are less than 24 hours away from the 20th anniversary of 9/11, family members of those aboard Flight 93 that went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, continue to return to the site. Eva Mastromattio with our sister station WICU in Erie joins us live from the Flight 93 Memorial, which is part of the National Parks System.
Plaza in Shanksville, where behind me is a wall of names, and right now members of the public, family members who have lost the crew passengers that were all aboard Flight 93 are now laying flowers and mementos here, and they are the ones, the heroes that fought off the hijackers on Flight 93 on 9/11. Earlier I talked to Gordon Felt, and he is the president of the families of Flight 93. Gordon's older brother Edward was one of the passengers, and it was Gordon who had to deliver the news to his mother on that tragic day.
The only thing worse than telling your mother is hearing as a parent that your child is gone. I can't imagine, but I had to. And I can imagine now because I've gone through it, and it's something that I would hope that others would never have to experience. Mom will be here, 89 years old. She'll be here with our whole family.
And Gordon tells me that every time he comes to Shanksville, and he's been here a lot over the 20 years, that he feels closer to his brother here. Gordon and his family are going to be here tonight, tomorrow. There's about a dozen of them, and they say they feel a bond with the other family members who will be here as well. An unprecedented number of family members returning for this 20th anniversary, about 500 of them, and some of them will be taking part tonight in a luminaria that is set for 7:30 here in Shanksville. Reporting live, I'm Eva Mastromattio. Nick, back to you.
Thank you, Eva. And still ahead, we're going to take you live to the Pentagon, where preparations are underway for the 20th anniversary, honoring the 184 victims, those on board American Airlines Flight 77, as well as those on the ground. You're watching Remembering 9/11 on WENY News. In Washington, preparations are underway for a ceremony tomorrow morning at the Pentagon. WENY Washington correspondent Matt Knadler joins us live from the Pentagon, where 64 people on American Airlines Flight 77 lost their lives, as well as 125 people on the ground.
It's important to remember not only those lives, but this ceremony, what we're going to be here for tomorrow, is sort of twofold for that, and also really serving as an educational tool of sorts for younger generations learning about what happened here at the Pentagon 20 years ago. Let's give you an idea of what we're expecting tomorrow here. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, will be those two leading the ceremony here at the Pentagon. That's scheduled for 9 a.m. Before that, at sunrise, officials will unfurl the American flag on the west side of the Pentagon, where American Airlines Flight 77 struck the building. In all, as Nick said, 184 lives lost here at the Pentagon during the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001. Now, earlier today, across town at the Justice Department, Attorney General Merrick Garland honored the lives of those lost on 9/11. Garland spoke in front of what's known as the survivor tree at the Justice Department building. The tree grew from a sapling, which came from a pear tree that stood on the World Trade Center Plaza in 2001. It was almost destroyed when the Twin Towers fell, but was later revived.
That day is forever seared into all of our memories. The pain, the terror, the enormous loss, and also the incredible displays of courage.
Vice President Harris will be here tomorrow for visiting the site later in the afternoon, from what we're told. Now, we are going to be here as well for Good Morning Twin Tiers. We'll be live with you tomorrow morning here from the Pentagon with another preview of the big day ahead, Nick.
All right, thanks, Matt. When we come back from the break, we're going to bring you the story of how members of the Ithaca Fire Department helped answer the call for emotional support when it came time to lay their fallen brothers to rest. We'll be right back. The attacks at the World Trade Center took the lives of 343 firefighters all who were laid to rest by their surviving brothers and sisters. WENY's Cody Taylor sat down with a local fire chief who helped provide a needed service and a shoulder to lean on.
Here at the 9/11 Memorial in downtown Manhattan. Now, when the attacks happened on September 11th, a call to action was put out, a call to action that the Ithaca Fire Department responded to by helping lay to rest some of the 343 firefighters that gave their lives.
We were down at the training center in Ithaca. Myself and a senior firefighter just got done doing a drill, and someone came down to actually pick us up to rotate us back to the station. And one of the senior guys had said, "Hey, a plane just hit one of the buildings down in New York City." And I knew from history that actually a long time ago a plane had hit the Empire State Building. And I said, "Yeah, that's happened in the past." And he says, "Yeah, but then another one hit." It was terrible. It was heartbreaking. And then all of a sudden, this place got locked down. The police started to kind of guard the doors. We weren't sure what was going on.
The first thought that crossed Basher's mind was to drive to New York City and help. But he knew that he had an obligation to stay in Ithaca and take care of the city. And that is exactly what he did until he received a call.
Started calling us for funerals, that people were fatigued. They'd gone to so many funerals over the next few weeks and months that they just couldn't do it anymore. So
just under 3,000 lives were taken during the attacks on September 11th, and 343 of them were firefighters. Now, despite never meeting these brave men, Basher still helped to carry their caskets.
It was definitely an odd thing. It was a surreal thing. It was incredibly sad, but that's what we could do at the time to support the situation. And it was a tough time for sure.
Whether it be here in Ithaca or Ground Zero in New York City, the lives that were lost on 9/11 will never be forgotten. And the first responders that helped America get through one of its darkest times won't be forgotten either. Reporting from Ithaca, Cody Taylor, WENY News.
From all of us at WENY News and Lilly Broadcasting, thank you for joining us for this anniversary special remembering 9/11. Network coverage of the 20th anniversary ceremonies begins tomorrow at 7 a.m. right here on WENY TV. Have a good night.